Alright guys, so today we are going to rank one of the lengthiest, one of the most successful, and arguably whether you hate him or love him, one of the most legendary and game-changing catalogs in all of music, and that is going to be the boy Drizzy Drake's full album catalog. We are going to be ranking every mixtape, every project that he has put out since the start of his career, minus the two first mixtapes he put out. And as you know, music is absolutely objective, so what I say goes. My opinion is completely 100% right, and if you disagree, then you're just simply wrong. So let's jump into it. We're going to start off with the first album he released and then rank them all the way up until the most recent album he released. So let's kick things off with So Far Gone. Now guys, this changed the entire landscape of hip-hop and just how mixtapes were kind of produced in general, right? At the time, the most popular mixtape artist, Lil Wayne, would basically take other people's beats, rap over them, almost make them like his own song just because of how hard he went on the track. And his entire mixtapes were kind of comprised of just that same model. A lot of different artists started doing the same exact thing, and if you guys were around for the Dat Piff era, then you definitely remember the insane mixtape runs that guys like Big Sean, Meek Mill, Wiz Khalifa, Rick Ross, Gucci Mane, Lil Wayne, and others had. But it was the boy Drizzy Drake with his third mixtape, So Far Gone, that truly changed the game in a lot of different ways, right? This is the start of when rappers combine both singing and rapping on tracks in ways that we've never heard before. And he basically gave us a complete full body of work that was structured the way an album would be, as it was extremely cohesive in sound. The sequencing of tracks was great. The mixture of rapping and singing was amazing, and again, something we had never seen at the time. The features were incredible. You had prime Lil Wayne all over this thing, No Diddy rapping his ass off. And most importantly, we had Drake and 40 introducing the world to what we now know as that signature Toronto sound with songs like Successful, Houston, Atlanta, Vegas, Brand New, giving us those darker, more calm, moody beats. Drake giving an ode to Houston on songs like Uptown or November 18th. It's unfortunate that Drake doesn't make as much music with that Houston sound these days as he used to. Now he's more focused on capturing that Atlanta sound. But this was a classic mixtape for a lot of different reasons and really just introduced the world to Drake and changed the course of hip-hop in its entirety. And you had massive hits on this thing like Best I Ever Had, Successful. Like 15 years later, this is easily the biggest mixtape of all time and revolutionary for a lot of different reasons. I do think that Drake was still kind of coming to form and figuring out, who he is as an artist and maybe who he is as a person as well, right? Like, it sounds like he really perfected this sound on albums like Take Care, and I think a lot of the music on Take Care sounded more mature and just aged better in general. Again, you had some personal records here. You had some radio-friendly hits like Best I Ever Had. You had tracks where Drake was going bar to bar with lyrical giants like Lil Wayne, Bun B. And you had arguably his best interlude of all time with Bria's interlude featuring Omarion. That was just a beautiful track. However, maybe because we never got this as a full album on streaming platforms, but I find there's not as much replay value on something like this as there is to some of Drake's earlier albums like Take Care, Nothing Was the Same. I also feel like he lacked some of the maturity that he had on later albums. And his sound wasn't as polished on this thing, which makes the replay value a little weaker compared to his albums that came after this. So for that reason, we can't go classic. I wouldn't necessarily go amazing either, just because for me personally, I don't go back to tons of these songs so much. But at the time, they were groundbreaking. They were amazing. So for that reason, I would definitely have to go great with this album. I'd give it a nice, 7.5 to 8.5 on 10, somewhere in that range. Next up is Thank Me Later. Now, this album gets way too much hate, alright? This thing is constantly trashed, forgotten about. Even Drake talks about this as if it was like some sort of big failure, right? Which it absolutely wasn't. At the time, it spawned massive hits. I think he sold like 500,000 copies in the first week with this thing. And if you actually dive deep into this track list, there's a lot of phenomenal records. You have songs like Light Up, where Jay-Z is giving advice to a young Drake and actually ends up predicting a lot of what happens later on in Drake's career with, other rappers trying to basically attack Drake and pick these silly beefs with him to actually benefit themselves. Like Jay-Z was predicting a lot of Drake's later career with this track, giving him amazing advice and really giving us one of his best features of the 2010s decade. You also have tracks like The Resistance and Karaoke, where, again, Drake was really forming that signature sound, that Toronto, moody R&B, dark hip-hop and R&B hybrid type sound that, he's really responsible for bringing to the forefront of music and has helped guys like The Weeknd, Bryson Tiller, Party Next Door, and more form their own sound. So while I think, Drake didn't necessarily take too much risk with this album or even, grow farther past the sound that he, very much developed on projects like So Far Gone, I do think that between, the incredible features from guys like Lil Wayne, Jay-Z, Nicki Minaj, to Drake, showing us that he could hold his own on tracks with, hip-hop vets like T.I., Jay-Z, Lil Wayne, Young Jeezy. And you couple that with all the hits that were on this album like Find Your Love, Over. That was something I didn't mention also. I think the production was pretty solid on this album. You had beats from guys like Kanye. You had 40, continuing to develop and progress the Toronto signature sound on songs like Fireworks, The Resistance, Shut It Down. You even had some of Boy Wonder's best beats on this thing, from Up All Night to Miss Me or Over. I think there was a lot of highlights on this thing. Yes, this was Drake, listening to the label and really trying to make the most, mainstream or artificially crafted sounding album that he's ever made in his career. Like, after this, he said in interviews, like, he went to the label and, never really took any advice from any sort of executive. He just kind of did his own thing going forward. But this was him really trying to listen to the label, get, those pop singers on the hooks, get hits, and do the whole, rollout and sequencing of this album in a very traditional way. And because of that, Drake didn't really progress his sound with this album too much, and it didn't really push any boundaries. And again, there is songs that have strong replay value, but overall as a full project, it's not something I go back to and spin, front to back. So I would have to go good with this thing. I definitely don't think it's a classic Drake album, but I also don't think it's as bad as, the latter half of his catalog. I think this would be like a top 7 Drake project of all time. So we're going to leave it in the good category, all right? And that brings us into Take Care, Drake's magnum opus, the most classic project that the certified PDF file has. This is an absolutely incredible album, guys. Needless to say, I don't really need to go into much detail on this. If you listen to Drake, you know why this is a classic album and why many consider it his best projects. I will tell you why I consider it his best project. I think that of his highest quality projects, this is the one that gave you every single aspect of Drake. If you like Drake for the melodies, you have that on tons of songs here. If you like Drake for pure rapping, you have that on songs here. If you like Drake when he does that kind of hybrid of both and makes a hit song where he's maybe singing on the hook, rapping on the verses, he has that as well here. If you loved his, original collaborations with Lil Wayne, you get some of the most classic ones on this project. And ultimately, while I think this project definitely does the best job at giving you both the R&B Drake and the hip-hop Drake, I also think that some of his best R&B songs and some of his best hip-hop songs come from this album, right? You have songs like Lord Knows. That's easily one of Drake's best rapping performances of all time. Same thing with Look What You've Done. Like, if you go to a Drake show in 2023, there's a reason why he's performing a large percent of the Take Care songs on that tour still, because those are his most timeless, his most classic records. The features on this thing were incredible. I know he stole a lot of songs that The Weeknd wrote that were supposed to be on House of Balloons for this album. But even with that, I mean, like, the melodies and the pockets that Drake hits on songs like Shot For Me or Good Ones Go or Doing It Wrong, like, he's just singing beautifully. I haven't heard Drake harmonize like that in a long time. No Diddy. Again, I don't think he's rapping at this elite of a level like he's rapping on songs like The Ride or Lord Knows. Like again, this is Drake at his peak form, giving you whatever you want, right? You want the hits, he's giving it to you here. You want R&B, you're getting some of Drake's best melodies and just R&B songs in general on this album. You want bars, he's giving you some of his best hip-hop tracks here. You want, good collaborations, you're getting some of the best features on any Drake project on this album. I mean, he even got an Andre 3000 verse on this record. And I think this album was responsible for the Drake is the type of guy type memes. Or at least this is when Drake really became the poster boy for simps everywhere, when he made an entire record about drunk dialing your ex. I mean, I didn't even want to go too much into detail about this record because if you're a Drake fan, you know why this is just one of his best projects. In my opinion, probably is his best project. And again, the reason being is that you get everything here. You get the hip-hop, the R&B. He blends the two perfectly. He builds his persona, his character, and develops as a person so well on this album. You could hear the self-reflection in a lot of these records. You could hear some of the best melodies he's ever used on these records. That's the thing, right? These songs are some of the best performances and hybrids of R&B and rap that we've ever heard from Drake and that we will probably ever hear from Drake. Like, whatever ghostwriters he had during this time, like, he needs to bring them back. Pay whatever the cost is, like, just get them back in the studio. The Weeknd, man, he needs to get back in that OVO sweatshop, penning up these classics. We need another Rick Ross and Drake collab. Like, we need the essence of this era back in our lives. This was an incredible time. This was an incredible album. This has to go in the classic ranking. I'm sorry. If you disagree, you're just wrong, okay? This is, if not the best, then one of the best Drake projects of all time, easily. Now let's move on to what, in my opinion, is probably his second best album of all time and probably his most mature record, easily, which is going to be Nothing Was the Same. Now, this album was incredible for many different reasons. I think this is probably the shortest Drake album we've ever got, easily. I stand corrected. That title goes to Honestly Nevermind, so just honestly never mind about what I just said. But yeah, man, this album was just cohesive front to back. You had a crazy opener intro, probably Drake's best intro of all time, with Tuscan Leather, the 3 beat switches on there, the beautiful sample, the third verse that he's rapping on there where he says he feels like Guy Pearce in Memento. I had just watched that movie when this album came out, and to this day I still don't know why he felt like Guy Pearce in Memento, but crazy bars on that track, amazing bars. In my opinion, could go down as one of the best intros of all time. And with a very concise track list, the album has no real lows, right? Obviously there's a couple duds on this thing in my opinion. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of Own It or 305 to My City. I don't think those are Drake's best songs. That's why in my opinion, this wouldn't rank as high for me as Take Care, just because I feel like the quality of every song on that album was a little bit stronger than Nothing Was the Same. But I do think that the sequencing here, how each song kind of flows into the next, coupled with the maturity that we got from Drake on songs like Too Much or From Time, I do think that this is just an incredible album front to back. You also had some of his best lyrical performances on songs like Pound Cake and Tuscan Leather, of course. Some of his most heartfelt verses on songs like From Time or Too Much. You had some great R&B stuff on there as well with songs like Connect. Some good hybrids of hip-hop and R&B on songs like Furthest Thing. And some energetic club bangers like Started From the Bottom, Worst Behavior, and The Language, which I think actually provided him the blueprint to later create songs like Trophies or 0 to 100 or the entire If You're Reading This Is Too Late album. I think this was the beginning of that more aggressive or ignorant Drake, a sound which in my opinion he really perfected on albums like If You're Reading This Is Too Late. But you know an album is a classic when even the bonus tracks are classic. You had songs like The Motion or Come Through or All Me. Like, these are all classic tracks. So for all these reasons and more, this has to go in the classic category. I would rank this a little bit below Take Care. However, I do still think this is a classic, and that leads us into, for nostalgia purposes, my most replayable Drake album. I don't think quality-wise this is his best project, but I definitely think it's up there. This has to go to If You're Reading This Is Too Late. Now, can we just acknowledge the legendary run that Drake went on from 2009 to like 2015, right? From So Far Gone to If You're Reading This Is Too Late, none of these albums can really be ranked below a 7 on 10. High quality stuff all around, and Drake was really changing his sound and incorporating a lot more to his subject matter, to his production, to his vocal inflections, to the cadences he was using or the aesthetic overall of a lot of these songs. He was changing that up on each and every album. And I think If You're Reading This Is Too Late was really the biggest evolution. This is when we saw Drake kind of telling the world, like, all right, stop playing with me. All right, like, I'm no longer that, little Jewish boy who simps over girls, who writes poems to my mom or, complains about my dad not being present enough. Like, there's no more of that. This is just straight ignorant. I got enemies, six God, running through the six with my woes. Like, just scary, aggressive, darker, and much more confident energy, more confident sounding than we've ever heard Drake in his entire career up to this point. It also seemed the most carefree he's been in his entire career. And I say that in a good way because I think later in his career, kind of stopped caring a little too much, where a lot of his projects just sounded very formulaic. I think with this one, he just maybe took it a little less seriously, but still made sure he was firing on all cylinders, right? Like, you have some of his best rapping performances here. You also have some of his greatest R&B cuts like Jungle. Some of his best, rap and R&B hybrids as well, with songs like Madonna or Star 67. I think those are two of his most underrated cuts and two of my favorite Drake songs, honestly. And I feel like this album kind of got overshadowed by the ghostwriting allegations and just really all the massive projects that Drake dropped after this. But this was a massive turning point in his career, and I think the biggest artistic risk that he's ever taken. And if I ever do a video about, rappers having like a villain arc, I think this is definitely where Drake's villain arc started. This is where he just told the world to stop, treating him like he was some little kid from Toronto who grew up, with a soft upbringing. Stop treating him like that soft Toronto kid and start treating him like the mob boss that he now, pretends to be. But in all seriousness, like, this is just where he really commanded respect, and it was well deserved because this project was really phenomenal front to back. In my opinion, an absolute classic. I go back and listen to this more than any other Drake project, but I do think that there's a lot of reasons why Take Care is a better project overall. I would rank this as probably like his number 2, maybe number 3 project of all time, though, easily. Now it gets interesting, and this is where I'll probably get a lot of hate in the comments, but in my opinion, Drake's career took a very, very sharp downturn after this moment going forward. So you're probably going to see a lot of takes that you don't really like if you are a Drake fan, and I'm happy to debate you or argue with you in the comments if you want. Again, my opinion is objective and it's just right, and you are just objectively wrong if you disagree with it. So with that being said, let's jump into it to, at the time, what I considered his most disappointing project to date, which is Views. Now, I will say this, I do think this album actually aged pretty well. Like, a lot of music from this era in 2016, I think rappers were focusing a little bit less on lyricism. You had guys like Kanye, Drake. All the biggest rappers at the time were kind of focusing a little less on bars and more on just kind of creating, and incorporating the new sound into their albums. And then you had that big emergence of the SoundCloud era and the trap scene, which kind of, again, shifted the focus away from the bars. So I do think from a rapping perspective, Views was not his strongest effort. I find this was also the beginning of kind of like monotone flow Drake, where he was kind of just, making songs that to me sounded very formulaic. Songs like Redemption, or even songs like Views, where it just sounds like he's kind of either rapping or singing on autopilot. He keeps the same flow the entire time. It's kind of a basic flow. He's not really hitting any sort of like, high notes or just any out-of-pocket melodies that, he's never experimented with before. And to me, with every Drake project before this, I got something new. Maybe not Thank Me Later, but with Take Care, I got some character development. With Nothing Was the Same, I got his most cohesive effort, his most mature effort, in my opinion. With If You're Reading This Is Too Late, I got his most, aggressive effort, where he really kind of stripped back that classic soft Drake character. And with this album, I just felt like he was really trying to make as many hits as possible. And there's a lot of cheap attempts at this. Riddled throughout this entire album, you have songs like Grammys with Future, where, have you ever gone back and listened to that song after 2016? It's not a bad song per se, but what really stands out about something like that? Where's the artistic evolution in something like that, right? This is more of a subjective thing, but like to me, songs like Too Good or Child's Play just had like really irritating melodies. I love the song Work by Rihanna and Drake, but to me, Too Good sounds like a cheap attempt at trying to make a radio hit. It sounds extremely formulaic. It sounds extremely tacky that, I don't know how to talk to you. That whole melody to me is just sounds very irritating. Hard to listen to, in my opinion. But there are elements of this album that, maybe it's for nostalgia purposes. Maybe it's, just for how iconic it is, but definitely some redeemable qualities here. As much hate as Drake gets for being a quote unquote culture vulture, for ripping off, the Jamaican or Caribbean island sounds, especially on this album. This was really like the first time he kind of did that. I do think his songs One Dance and Controlla were some of the best on this album, and honestly might be some of the best hits of Drake's entire career. The melodies he's hitting on Controlla, just super smooth. They take me back to that, summer of 2016. Same thing with One Dance. And I think that's where Drake kind of pushed the envelope the most on this entire project, is when he was kind of ripping off sounds from other cultures or other people, right? You had songs like Hotline Bling, which was originally labeled as a Cha-Cha remix, which, if you guys didn't know, Cha-Cha was a song by Drum. It came out before Hotline Bling, and it has the same framework, a lot of the same melodies as Hotline Bling. Originally, Drake released Hotline Bling as a random loose single and called it Cha-Cha Remix, but once it blew up, he, renamed it Hotline Bling, and when Dram called him out on this, he actually got beat up by Drake's bouncer for it. Now, that's unrelated, but yeah, I think where this album does shine is in its singles like Controlla, Hotline Bling, or One Dance. Future also wrote him a nice hook on the song Feel No Ways. He had solid rapping performances on songs like Western Road Flows or You With Me, but again, I don't really go back to those songs as much as I do to other Drake, timestamp type record tracks. Overall, I just don't think I was ready for this album when it first came out, and it's kind of left a bad taste in my mouth ever since. I don't think the subject matter is as mature as on his other albums. I don't think the evolution artistically is as prevalent on this album as it was with each album before this one. I think there's like desperate, blatant, tacky attempts at trying to chase hits on this one with songs like Too Good. Tracks like Child's Play, I think they're very poorly written. All the club bangers on this thing, like Pop Style or Grammys or Still Here or Hype, like all those songs sound like If You're Reading This Is Too Late leftovers. Again, there's no real, in my opinion, artistic evolution here, except for the Caribbean island type songs that we got, like Controlla and One Dance. I think those are the highlights of the album. And while you could say what you want about him kind of stealing that sound or that vibe from, other cultures, I do think those songs stand the test of time as some of Drake's biggest and most enjoyable hit singles. So for all those reasons, we are going to place this in the good category. I would rate this about the same as Thank Me Later. I do think it's aged better. I think he's had better hits that have more longevity that came off of this track list than on Thank Me Later. But to me, I'd probably go back to them about equally. But let's move on to another album that actually kind of aged decently for me, which is going to be More Life. I guess this isn't really an album, it's like a playlist. This was also something that kind of pissed me off this late in Drake's career. He started, making these either playlists or mixtapes. Like, he just stopped calling projects albums. And in my opinion, this was just like a very cheap excuse at like lowering people's standards to the quality that maybe we'd receive on the overall project. And I don't know, man, again, I think I was such a fan of, early Drake. As he came up, I think there was like evolution in each and every project from So Far Gone all the way to If You're Reading This Is Too Late, that once he started, substituting the quality and the artistic evolution for more just quantity, I think that kind of threw me off in this era. And originally, I would have told you that More Life was straight trash. If you asked me when this thing first dropped, I would have told you it was garbage. Again, same criticisms as with Views. I don't think there was enough self-reflection on this album. I don't think the subject matter was as deep as it was on track lists like Take Care or Nothing Was the Same. I also don't think the hits were as strong on More Life as they were on albums like If You're Reading This Is Too Late or even Take Care. And instead of that, classic Toronto-sounding R&B that we got on, a lot of tracks on Take Care or tracks on If You're Reading This Too Late, like Jungle, instead we are now getting, more Afro beats or Caribbean-style music from Drake. Now, again, I think there is something, beautiful about just music aging in general, where it's you could have a completely different perception of an album or a song 5-10 years down the road than you did when it first came out. And sometimes you just got to give it time before you fully get it. 2017, I would have told you Drake sounded like he's half asleep rapping in, a very monotone delivery on a song like Do Not Disturb. But, fast forward 6-7 years later, I think that's one of his best timestamp records. The beat on there is beautiful. The bars are nice. Songs like that age tremendously for me. I like the intro on this as well. I think this was a nice kind of almost spin-off or continuation of what he was doing on If You're Reading This Is Too Late. Free Smoke to me sounds like what Pop Style or Hype or Grammys off of You should have sounded like. The diversity on this thing as well. I think songs like Passion Fruit and Blem, again, while I wouldn't have liked them probably in 2017, to me, they've aged decently over time. Song Get It Together as well. I think all these songs just have a nice little, melody going on. And not everything has to be so serious, right? I think I was maybe expecting a little too much from Drake when this album first came out. I did the same thing with Kanye, right? To me, I wanted every album to be as good, if not better, than The College Dropout from a lyrical standpoint. And when he kind of dumbed down the lyrics, but maybe evolved a lot of the production or melodies that he was incorporating, takes your ear a little bit of time to adjust to it once you set those, standards or those expectations. It was the same thing with More Life. To me, I was expecting, once he announced it was a playlist, I thought it would be If You're Reading This Is Too Late. I was kind of expecting that vibe, especially when I pressed play and heard the intro. It sounded to me like he was picking up right where he left off on If You're Reading This Is Too Late. But I like how many styles and sounds he kind of incorporated on this thing. You don't really get bored of it, from a production perspective. He's incorporated the UK sound. He's got Sampha doing an interlude on this thing. Besides the intro, the first half of this project is basically all Afro beats. Then he goes into the trap bangers with, features from Quavo, 2 Chainz, Travis, Young Thug. And he caps the album off in the most classic Drake way possible by giving you Do Not Disturb, which is, again, one of my favorite time stack records by Drake of all time. So for all these reasons and more, this album or playlist or whatever the hell you want to call it, this is going in the good category. I feel like people might hate on me because, I'm putting So Far Gone in the great category and then all these in the good. But ask yourself if there's anything as beautiful as a Bria's interlude, or if there's any hits on any of these projects that did more for Drake's career than a song like Best I Ever Had did. That song in 2024, 15 years later, is still in the top 50 most streamed songs on Apple Music currently. That doesn't mean all time. That means right now, today, that is one of the most streamed records right now. Which speaks to the longevity of that project, which, in my opinion at least, projects like Thank Me Later or More Life just simply don't have. But let's keep going. Next up, we got Drake's album Scorpion. Now, this was one of the biggest albums of Drake's career, and it came at a pivotal time right after his beef with Pusha T, where he took a massive L. Pusha T exposed Drake for having a kid and just embarrassed him on a very public level, something we had not seen up until that point ever in Drake's career. Now, there's some highlights on this thing, right? You have massive records like God's Plan, Nice for What, In My Feelings. You had some solid hits like Nonstop. You had some great tracks like Mob Ties, which we just found out was completely written by someone else by the name of Vori. But honestly, what's kind of frustrating about this album, well, there's kind of two things, right? So I think Drake took the approach here of, instead of kind of making that hybrid R&B and rap music, he's going to devote one side of this album just to hip-hop, one side of this album strictly to R&B. And on paper, I think that's a great idea. I just don't think he executed very well on it. First of all, almost the entire first half of this album is just devoted to referencing the entire beef that he was having with Pusha T and Kanye West. For someone who just had a kid, for someone who's, experiencing the most success he's ever seen in his entire career, he was on top of the rap game at this point, no questions asked. You would think he would come with some more interesting subject matter on this record. And there were songs that he did, he gave us songs like Sandra's Rose or Emotionless or March 14th, kind of dove into some more, personal storytelling or self-reflection. But other than that, a lot of things kind of fall flat to me on the first half of this record. The intro was kind of boring. Again, the subject matter was, very just relevant to the beef that he was in at the time. Not kind of interesting enough where it has that, staying power that a lot of his earlier music had. Like, you go back to songs like 8 out of 10 or Can't Take a Joke, it just sounds like time capsule records. It just sounds like, diss records to Pusha T and Kanye West. It's hard to have, strong replay value to songs like that when they're completely just devoted to one issue that you had at one period of time. And then the R&B side of this thing, while it wasn't bad per se, it's kind of crazy to think that he created a lot of this album, after the whole Kanye and Pusha T beef, because if not, it would have just been one of his most forgettable projects, in my opinion. Again, the R&B side was not bad per se, but just very forgettable. You had songs like Is There More or Blue Tint, which is just, similar formulas, similar flows, similar frameworks that Drake has used before on previous tracks. Nothing too special about them. I do think you get one of his best R&B performances, really of his entire career, with the song called Jaded. And yeah, to me, just a lot of forgettable, R&B cuts, a lot of rap records that had no staying power because they were very relevant to the current beef that he was in. They just kind of didn't age very well. And honestly, to me, this whole thing just kind of sounded like a very much plug-and-play formula where he was just trying to sound as, quote-unquote Drake as possible, if that makes sense. So for all those reasons and more, I'm going to have to go with the mid category for this album. I do love Jaded and Mob Ties, though. I do think those are some of his best records, even if they weren't written by Drake himself. And I completely forgot to rank What a Time to Be Alive. I'm going to have to go good with this one. I won't spend too long talking about it just because it is a collab mixtape and it's very short. It was kind of like an intermission between If You're Reading This Is Too Late and Views. Do think it's a good project. There's songs I go back to. I think, there's some of the best Drake and Future records on this project. It was what I wanted to hear on songs like Grammys on Views or Used to This by Future. I don't think that they reached this level of collaboration, if that makes sense. I don't think that they reached this high of a quality of song making or just chemistry that they had. No Diddy. After this album, I think we got some of the best Drake and Future cuts on this album. Songs like Scholarships, Digital Dash, Diamonds Dancing. These are top tier Drake and Future collabs. It served its purpose. It did what it needed to do. Apparently they finished this whole thing in 6 days. I do have my qualms with it. I do kind of think it's like Drake, entering Future's world. He doesn't really bring his own kind of sound to it as much as I would have hoped. But phenomenal records nonetheless. It aged decently. The real question is, do I rank this higher than Her Loss? And it's kind of hard to say, honestly, but we'll get into that later when we do rank Her Loss. For now, this is going in the good, and let's move on to one of my most hated Drake projects of all time, and that's going to have to be Dark Lane demo tapes. I could rant about this thing for a while. I won't. I'll save you guys the headache. But to me, this was when Drake kind of, turned into the new decade, 2020, and hit a little bit of a fork in the road, in my opinion. I think, he got that award for Artist of the Decade. He did that Rap Radar interview. And to me, it kind of seemed like he was almost reflecting back on that whole decade and really kind of summing it all up as this is a new leaf, a new chapter, a new sound will be emerging because we're entering this new decade. And, will I kind of have that staying power? It's going to be interesting to see how my legacy fesses up against Kendrick and Cole. These were really things he was saying within the interview. And to me, it kind of sounded like he was unsure of where he wanted to go next and hit a little bit of a fork in the road where, he wanted to do his best to connect to the next generation of hip-hop listeners while also kind of staying true to his sound. And I know this is just a bunch of throwaways, this record. This really wasn't an album. He announced CLB, I think, before this, and this was kind of just an intermission, a little playlist during COVID to tie everyone over. There were some okay cuts on here, Desires with Future wasn't bad. Chicago Freestyle was nice. The intro, Deep Pockets, that was a pretty good song. It had a dark beat. It had that classic kind of Drake harmonizing and that classic kind of reflection on his career and on his life. I like the bounciness on songs like Landed. But the songs I named are kind of just Drake, doing Drake. My problem with this project is songs like Pain with Playboi Carti or Demons with Fabio Foreign or War or D4L, where it really just sounds like it's Drake featured on someone else's song, on someone else's sound, and he's not bringing anything new to the table. Before this, anytime Drake kind of hopped on a record of a sound that he was kind of not very acquainted with at that point in time, like when he dropped on Versace by Migos, when he dropped on Tuesday by McConan, any of the Future records that he initially jumped on, he brought his own sound, his own style, but still, held his weight when it came to the bars he was delivering, the flows, the overall feature as a whole. I found his features here, they just sounded lazy. It sounded like he was playing catch up with a lot of the artists on the track, doing his best Playboi Carti impersonation, his best Fabio Foreign impersonation on the records that they were featured on. It really just sounded to me like he was trying to, again, keep up with the younger generation and find his, footing in this new sound, this new era that we were entering in 2020. And for someone who's so pivotal in influencing the sound of, the generation that came after him, it was disappointing to see him, in my opinion, playing catch up with the newer acts instead of trying to dictate and mold the sound of the generation that came in the 2020s. Anyways, not many highlights on this thing for me. I also think he has some of his most boring performances of all time on songs like Time Flies, even from Florida with Love. I know that's kind of like a fan favorite, but to me his delivery on there is just really monotone, really boring. Nothing stands out. I like the subject matter, I like the storytelling on that thing, but to me, I don't know, something about that delivery I can't go back to it. There's no replay value for me. So for all those reasons and more, this is going in the trash category. I'm sorry, Drake. I'm sorry to all the OV hoes who are going to blast me in the comments, but again, my opinion's objective, man. If you don't agree, you are wrong. Let's keep it moving to CLB. This is another one that's going to piss you OV hoes off, all right? Because this is going straight in the trash, all right? The reason I can't put this higher is because there are not songs that I like more on Scorpion than I like on this, and I would say Scorpion's a mid-album. I would say this is even more mid. This sounds like Drake returning to his roots, I'll give him that. Doesn't sound like he's trying to, copy anyone's flow, anyone's sound, anyone's style like he was doing on Dark Lane demo tapes. But this is supposed to be his next, studio album, quote unquote. Again, during this time, he, had this sort of habit of, naming certain projects real albums, naming other projects just playlists or mixtapes. So it kind of shifted the standard to which we were holding the project to, depending on the label that he gave it. This was an album he was hyping for, years and years before it released. Kind of the same effect as he had with Views. At least to me, I was hyped up for Views since 2014. He dropped it in 2016. It seemed underwhelming to me based on the standard I expected it to be at. And it was the same thing with CLB. This was like his first album in a new decade. This was hyped up with billboards showing all the different features that were supposed to be on the project. And on paper, this feature list was incredible. You had Lil Wayne, Jay-Z, Rick Ross, Future, Young Thug, Travis, Thames, Lil Baby, Lil Durk, who in 2021 were like the biggest rappers in the game. And I don't know, everything about this album to me just screams trash, screams lack of effort. Like, we start off with Champagne Poetry. That could have easily been his best intro of all time. He comes in with, again, that lazy, that monotone, same cut and dry, cut and paste delivery that we've heard from him on so many records in the past. Nothing new in terms of subject matter. He wasn't telling us anything refreshing or interesting about his life. At least in my opinion. Again, this is objective. My opinion has to be right, but I don't know. To me, this whole album bored me. Boring, repetitive melodies, repetitive flows, lack of intriguing subject matter, lack of any sort of cohesion or any real concept to the album in general. Some standouts here were songs like Fair Trade. I do go back to that song occasionally. I think it's a pretty good song. Love the production on Champagne Poetry or You Only Live Twice, or even Pipe Down. I think that's an alright song as well. But the hits on this thing are just embarrassing. Girls Like Girls or Girls Want Girls, I forget what that song is called. Way Too Sexy, these are just embarrassing songs. You have Knife Talk, where again, Drake is trying to enter 21 Savage's and Metro Boomin's world. This was literally a Savage Mode 2 leftover. The song was originally just supposed to be a solo 21 Savage song. And again, it just sounds like Drake is kind of a feature on this thing and doing his best 21 Savage impersonation, whereas he used to hop on, new sounds with artists that he's never collaborated with before and brought his own unique style to the track. Now it just, again, sounds like he's playing catch-up. His most bland studio album to me of all time, the most desperate attempts he's ever made at trying to get hits with songs like Girls are Way Too Sexy. And while I don't think the lows on CLB are as bad as Scorpion, there's no Ratchet Happy Birthday on CLB. Actually, I take that back. Way Too Sexy could arguably be his worst song other than Ratchet Happy Birthday. But I do think the lows are maybe less low than they are on Scorpion. Simultaneously, other than maybe one or two songs out of 20 or 23, this is a long ass track list. Out of 2 songs, there are no real redeemable qualities for this thing. It's aged horribly. I saw Drake in concert, I believe it was a year or two ago, and I don't think he performed a single one of these tracks. And that says something, right? If you're not performing a single one of these songs on an album you released most recently, what does that say about what you actually think of the project itself? I take that back. He did perform Too Sexy and Knife Talk. In my opinion, those are still some of his worst singles. And for all these reasons and more, this is going straight in the trash bin. But let's move on to the next one. And this one might get me in the most trouble because honestly, never mind, I cannot put this in the absolute trash of trash bins, all right? This to me is not his worst project of all time. And there's a lot of redeemable qualities to it. But at the same time, there's a lot of elements to this track list that just feel unfinished, unpolished. Drake's melodies are a little bit atrocious on certain songs, honestly. and that's probably why a lot of people think this is absolutely his worst track list, his worst project to date. I can't say, in my opinion, it personally is, just because I'm a massive fan of kind of music and Afro house in general, and this was a sound that Drake incorporated heavily onto this project. I believe it was executively produced by Kind of Music, or at least Black Coffee, and I love this type of music, personally. However, when it first came out, on paper, I thought that it was a much better idea than how they actually executed it. For example, if you look up Get It Together Afro House Remix or Take Care Afro House Remix, you'll realize Drake vocals sound great on an Afro House type beat. But he was doing a lot of weird vocal inflections here. He was like trying to sing falsetto for a little bit of this project, and it just didn't sound good to me. The lyrics were kind of cringy, like your, kitty cat is calling my name, or, chasing sunsets in California. Like, just didn't seem authentic to who Drake was. Some, very monotonous, classic, Drake slowed down, formulaic deliveries on songs like Text Go Green. I think this is a personal bias, but just because of my love for Afro House in general, I do find myself going back to some of these songs, even something like Text Go Green, where I think Drake's performance was kind of mediocre. The melody is simple, it's catchy, the production is great. Songs like Tie That Binds or Keeper have that classic kind of music sound, while also kind of, bring Drake some uncharted territory production-wise for him to sing or rap on. So I appreciate the effort and the thought that Drake kind of put into this, where he's thinking like, all right, let me switch up my direction completely and, conquer a genre I never have in the past. Execution-wise, I think he could have done a lot better. A lot of these, melodies, lyrics, just overall song structure sound uninspired, sound kind of weak in general. But I like a few tracks on here. I like the overall, kind of music sound in general. That's where I think my bias kind of comes into play here. And I also just think Drake in general sounds good on Afro House beats. If you look up any sort of Drake Afro House remix, you'll see that his, vocals just kind of flow very smoothly with that type of production. So for that reason, I find myself going back to a lot of these tracks. I don't think it's as trash as everyone says. So you could trash my opinion all you want, but I'm going to have to go mid to good with this album. I'll put it in the mid just to not piss you guys off too much, because I know if I put this in the same category as A Views or A More Life, all the post 2015, the new Gen Z Drake fans are just gonna come at me. So we'll leave this in the mid. We won't stir up the pot too much. All right, now let's move on to, in my opinion, Drake actually low-key making kind of a comeback here with Her Loss. This was a pretty solid effort to me. I think he did a good job this time around of not, entering 21 Savage's world per se and just kind of playing catch up with him, but really, doing a good job at meshing both their sounds together to create a really strong collaboration project. It's fun, it's exciting, the energy is high. I like the way he transitioned, Jimmy Cooks on the last album into this whole thing that was kind of like a prelude to this. And I think their chemistry works really well. Does it work as well as him in Future? I would probably say no. Is this a better project than What a Time to Be Alive? It's kind of hard to say. I think both of them were trying to accomplish two different things. This was more meant as like a full-length album, whereas What a Time to Be Alive seemed like it was thrown together a little more quickly, a little more organically. This seemed like it had more thought put into it. But I do love a lot of tracks on here. Like, I love the energy Drake's bringing on songs like Major Distribution, Broke Boys, Back Outside Boys. I love his hooks on the singles, Spin 'Bout You and Rich Flex. I gotta emphasize the energy though. I think the energy he brought on this album was very reminiscent to If You're Reading This Is Too Late, and probably the most energized and inspired Drake has sounded in years, honestly. It sounded like he heard the criticisms from Honestly Nevermind, and he was like, you know what guys, I'm gonna give you the most classic Drake sounding project that I could, and I'm gonna bring 21 Savage in here to kind of spice things up a bit, no Diddy, and I'm also going to make sure I bring that energy. There's gonna be no, me playing catch up to 21, or me kind of coming in with some, very monotonous, boring flows, like, in my opinion, he was bringing on projects like CLB or Dark Lane demo tapes. Like, you could tell he was obviously trying on this project. And the result was great. I mean, you got, some strong R&B cuts like Hours in Silence, some good rap songs like Middle of the Ocean, some more experimental stuff with tracks like Major Distribution, Back Outside Boys, Jumbotron Poppin'. There's a wide variety of sounds here. Drake and 21 Savage complemented each other well. The energy was high, the rapping performances were good, the harmonies, the R&B tracks were good. I have no real complaints about this album. I believe Travis is the only feature on there as well. And the song he's on is also amazing, like full of energy. The beat switch that leads into his verse, again, just keeps this album super exciting. I don't think I was bored for a moment on this entire project. However, for some reason, I don't find myself going back to so many songs off this track list. Replay value is not all the way there for me like it is with some other releases that came out of 2022, like Heroes and Villains by Metro Boomin or Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by Kendrick. I think this is a fun project. Maybe it lacks a little bit of depth that would help it have some stronger staying power, or maybe just, a couple extra hits. Because I know Rich Flex was a big song off this thing, but there was no, massive standout single on it besides Rich Flex. So, I don't know. I don't see myself going back to it as much, but it is a good project overall, so we will leave it in the good category. I think, again, it serves a different purpose than What a Time to Be Alive, but over time might be considered a higher quality project, or at least something he put more effort into than What a Time to Be Alive, at least in my opinion. Again, my opinion is always right, so let's cap this off with my opinion on Care Package. That's going to be the last project here. I forgot to rank it earlier, or you kind of don't really know where to throw it in just because it's a bunch of loosies by Drake. I think they're very good. I'll put it in the good category. I won't spend too long talking about it because, again, it just is some loosies. It has some of his best cuts ever, like The Motion, 5 a.m. in Toronto, Club Paradise, Dreams Money Can Buy, Free Spirit. From that Take Care era, those loosies were like great indicator for what was to come. I remember being super hyped listening to those tracks, kind of hearing a little bit more of a darker approach from Drake, a little bit more of a, bar-focused approach as well from Drake. And it got me hyped up for Take Care and kind of gave me the appetizer for what to expect there. Songs like Trust Issues as well. But as an overall project, these were loosies for a reason, right? There's a lot of reasons why many of these tracks were left off, the albums that they were loosies for. As a project of loosies, I'd put it on around the same level as something like A More Life. It was also structured in that more, playlist type format. We'll leave it in the good category. I also forgot that, For All the Dogs was just not included on this tier list. So honestly, I think it's kind of unfair to rate it this early since it only came out maybe 7 months ago. However, at the time of this video, I'd probably put it anywhere in between the good or the mid category. I like rating these projects more on a scale from 1 to 10 rather than a tier list because I don't think it does projects like Her Loss or Views justice to put it in the good category. I think it's somewhere between good and great, but leaning more towards that good side. The same thing with For All the Dogs. I think it's leaning towards the mid category, but it's kind of hovering between good and mid. I do love the Scary Hours 3 Deluxe edition that he added to that second half of the album, but there's no real cohesion between that and the rest of the project. And to me, For All the Dogs is something that sounds like the biggest playlist effort that Drake has put out thus far. It sounds like more of a playlist to me than something even like A More Life. Like First Person Shooter doesn't belong on the same project as a Tried Our Best or a What Would Pluto Do or 8 a.m. in Charlotte. And I'm naming all those 4 tracks because I think those are my favorites off the, original version of the album, at least thus far. I love pretty much every song that he put on the deluxe, though, don't get me wrong. If you add that to the original track list, this definitely has to go in the good category. I think we've seen some of Drake's strongest rapping performances on that deluxe Scary Hours 3 edition of this album. But we'll leave it at that, and if you guys want me to do a full deep dive review on For All the Dogs, or really any Drake album, just leave it in the comments. If you guys think I got any of these wrong, go ahead, blast me away in the comments, no diddy. I'm willing to argue with any of you guys because this is just the perfect tier list, and my opinion can never be wrong, and if you disagree, you are wrong. So go ahead, try me in the comments, and I will tell you why you're wrong. But in all seriousness, I appreciate you guys so much if you stuck around to this point. Please hit that like button, that sub button, even if you did not like my opinions here. And if you didn't, really, tell me in the comments where you would rank these Drake projects. Tell me what I got wrong, what I got right, and what you want to see next. Whose catalog should I rank next? Or should I go toe-to-toe like Drake's catalog versus Kanye's or Drake's versus Kendrick's? I was thinking of doing both those. Let me know if you want that in the comments. Let me know what other type of content you would like to see. And until the next one, guys, appreciate y'all, and I'll catch you in the next one.